Hi, I'm Celia Boothman, founder of LTR Coaching, and I'd like to welcome you to the Inspired Triathletes podcast, where I'll be bringing you stories from female triathletes and taking on topics that are important to women in the sport. Hi and welcome to today's episode. Today I'm here with Esther Goldsmith from Sports Wales, and she's going to talk to us a lot about females in sport and our unique challenges, things about our physiology that can help or hinder us, and how we can work with that to become the best that we can be. So we're going to talk a little bit about your background first of all. So what is it that you do now? We'll start with that. That's one. I don't want to overwhelm you with questions, so that's the first one.
I tend to go on tangents, so
Yeah, me too.
well, thanks for having me, first of all. I'm a physiologist. I work at Sport Wales. So I work within the High Performance Institute at Sport Wales. But I guess we have a kind of a focus on development athletes as well. So lots of what we do is trying to work with those who are on like pathways in sports so that they can achieve their potential, whether that's in the sport and they choose to do that as a senior or in their life in the future. So we're setting them up, I guess, for success. I do quite a wide range of things. I think it's long gone, not just physiology being just kind of measuring people's lactates and that's all we did. So I do a lot of work with various different sports about like training kind of smart and how you can do that and how coaches can use data to inform their training. But then a large part of my job is around the female athlete. So I work with lots of sports, both with coaches and with athletes, mostly trying to educate them on kind of just why we need to treat females like females, and we might need some specific considerations around that. And yeah, just getting that conversation started. There's a whole range of things that you can do and we can do. And so with some individual athletes, I might work kind of on a higher level around like symptom management and like really paying attention to menstrual cycles, for example. But sometimes it's like, okay, you need to make sure that you've got a girls' bathroom in your setup, so it's a really wide range of things, but it's basically how we can support female athletes better.
Yeah, no, that sounds amazing. And so have you had any resistance to that kind of conversation?
Yeah, I think it's a hard one, particularly when things are going well for sport. So if, I don't know, a female athlete might be performing well, or a female team, they're like, well, we're doing well, like, why should we change anything? That can often be hard. And I find that even though I often come at it with a health point of view, from a health point of view, actually trying to kind of sell female athlete health as a performance thing usually works better, because ultimately lots of people care mostly about performance. So
Yeah, so it's like doesn't matter about health so much.
yeah, exactly.
But then you've got the longevity in sport, haven't you, that you have to consider as well. And if you're not healthy,
You're just going to break, and I think that's what we're trying to really encourage. I guess that's why we're working with development athletes, so that they learn what they need to now, and they don't have to make the mistakes that some people have been making. Yeah.
And I think those mistakes have been being made, and we have seen that now, like with women in sport. And so you've got that a bit of evidence to back you up.
Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe before, that's probably why it's sort of starting to come out now, is that we are seeing what happens if you ignore that stuff. And also kind of thinking, well, actually, we can do a little bit better for women as well. We haven't really thought about it. We didn't used to think about it at all, really.
No, there's so many sports that have this history of training males. But if you look at the professional sport in females, it's only 100 years old. And so, we need to, that's one of the reasons why we need to put more energy in that, because we don't have the same training history.
Yeah, definitely. And you run as well, don't you? And what else do you do? I saw you're Pilates instructor.
Yeah, I'm a Pilates instructor. I love running. If I had my own way, I'd do like I've done a few ultras, and that's like
Oh,
trail
nice.
ultras is my favorite kind of thing. I've dialed down a little bit recently. Just fitting training for ultras in is not necessarily conducive
Mm,
to having a to to having a married life, to having another job. Like it's just I
yeah.
just can't put it in. Yeah, but I teach Pilates, which is cool. And I think that's that's mostly
And
it.
you've got a dancing background, isn't there, as
Yeah, so I
well?
trained as a
Yeah.
dancer. I guess that's where um, I kind of got into sport. So I
Mm,
trained as a dancer until I was 21 and could have gone on to do it professionally, but it kind of broke me. Um,
right.
which I guess there are often similarities in lots of in lots of sports when you get to that age. It
Mm,
makes you or breaks you, and I just decided I didn't want that for myself anymore. But I think that's one of the reasons that's led to this job is I really want to give people the opportunity to not experience that, to experience something else,
yeah.
to have a positive experience, um, so that they continue. Because there's always that part of me that's like, oh, what if I had stayed?
Yeah. Yeah.
But, it is what it
Yeah,
is.
that's interesting because I I was gonna ask that whether that was what led you into,
Mm,
going down that route because I remember when I was younger, I was into cross country running and I was quite good at running. And then I sort of hit a bit of a like low point when I hit puberty. I started getting a bit slower, and all
yeah,
the other girls were getting faster, but they didn't have periods. And I was like, well, if I want to be successful in running, I have to be unhealthy. So that
mm,
in my mind, it was like, I
mm,
can't carry on,
mhm.
running competitively because that means I have to be unhealthy and I didn't want to be unhealthy. So I sort of gave up. I was like, I don't want to do it anymore because I'm
Yeah.
getting slower. I don't want to be unhealthy. And so I just stopped for quite a long time and then
Well,
went back into it later. So it's interesting that you say that because I can definitely relate to that idea of like if you have to want to be successful, you have to ruin your body. And
yeah,
it's like,
yeah.
but it doesn't have to be like that, does it
It
really?
doesn't. No, it's interesting. It's interesting you chose to go down the healthy route because I think lots of people
Mm,
don't. And actually, I've just about a year ago worked with an athlete a little bit who was feeling exactly the same as you. So she was a triathlete, but actually running was her kind of main passion. Um, and she's going through puberty and finding that she was getting slower and
mm,
feeling really kind of disgruntled that she was getting slower and felt that it was as a result of her putting on weight. So she came
yeah.
looking for support to how to lose weight. And we were like, no, like you're growing. Like this is like a
Mm,
natural sign of puberty. And it is a really hard time for girls, particularly because boys tend to get faster and stronger
yeah.
and girls don't. And it kind of
Mm,
dips or plateaus before it then picks up again in kind of late adolescence, early 20s. Um, so it's really hard, but I think we were able to give her enough encouragement that meant that she kind of stuck with it, and
mm,
she's still running, which is amazing. But yeah, so many people don't, and so many girls drop out of sport at that time
yeah.
because they feel like they're getting worse or they're embarrassed or yeah, so many other reasons.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was like. Oh, I'm putting on weight, and my mum was like, "It's normal for you to put on
Yeah.
weight. You'll lose it again. And there was all that conversation, and I think she was probably the main reason that I didn't want to push myself because she was always like, "Stay
Mm,
healthy, stay healthy,"
that's amazing.
which is great, but it meant I stopped running
Yeah.
because I did other stuff as well, so it's not the end of the world. But sometimes I think, oh, it was, I was fairly talented. I could have
Mm,
pushed harder and been more competitive when I was younger, but it felt like it was a choice between
mm,
health or
or
competing. And
competing, which is
like,
sad. Yeah, it
yeah,
shouldn't.
it is because it shouldn't be. You should be
Yeah,
able to have both, really. And
yeah.
it's like you being able to support that athlete and saying it's okay and get her through that time because it is you feel really vulnerable when you're that
Mm.
age as well. It's difficult. I've got 15-year-old son and he's just like, "Rah."
Yeah, yeah.
And I think about me at that age. I was like, Yeah, totally different. And
No.
we do climbing competitions, and you can see the girls, and they're getting heavier. They're just some of them are still lean and just really strong, and others
Yeah.
you can see they're putting on weight, and it's such a massive difference between them. Whereas the boys are just all kind of like phew, getting stronger
Yeah.
and stronger, taller.
Yeah. It's
It's
hard
really
being
tough.
a girl.
Yeah, I think it is quite hard at that age. Well, there's a lot of things. We've got our challenges, but they're
Yeah,
good.
exactly.
They sort of like help build us into complete athletes, really, I think.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about how you work with coaches and kind of sports professionals. So if we're like, how important do you think it is? You said you work with menstrual, sometimes it's with the menstrual cycle
Mhm.
and other times it's with other things. How important do you think it is to sort of track our menstrual cycle or be aware of it in any way?
Like, if you're not doing it with a female athlete and you're not having a conversation about whether they're menstruating regularly, if you know that they're not on contraception, like, you're not doing that, you're doing them a disservice. I feel like it's a quite a blunt thing to say, but,
Mm,
I really feel quite strongly that that's true. Like, we know, A, having a regular cycle is a sign of health, is a sign that someone's body is, um, ready to go, it's got enough energy, and therefore it's gonna adapt to training. If you're a coach and you care about and that you and your athlete care about performance and you're
mm,
not asking them whether they have a regular cycle, and you're constantly setting them training, but they're not adapting to it, well, then if they're probably not having a regular cycle because they don't have the energy to adapt. So, um,
mm,
the 2 go hand in hand. Um, and then if they are having a regular cycle, but they're having symptoms that can affect them, then you also need to know about that. That's major. We're not talking about like minimal gains, we're not talking about 1%ers, we're talking like 50%. Like I think it's like 90% around there, depending on what paper you look at, of females experience symptoms that are negative associated with their menstrual cycle. If you don't know
mm,
that about that as a coach, then that can affect their training,
yeah,
um, and that could affect their competition. It could affect how they feel. So yeah, I think tracking is like really important. What you do with that data is kind of up to you, and um, it can be daunting as a coach because it's like, oh my gosh, there's this whole other world that I need to know about, and
yeah,
do I have to change everything around it? And the answer is no, but
mm,
the athlete and you need to have a conversation about it, how they're feeling, how can you help support that athlete better, or maybe it's a team of athletes, how can you support them better, so that they feel comfortable to share things with you, so that they can perform and be healthy
yeah.
and yeah, work with you, I guess.
Yeah, I think that acknowledging it even can
Mm.
be even just that, saying,
Yeah,
okay, I understand that you're not feeling great at this time of your cycle. That to me is major, because otherwise you mention it and you get no response. You think,
yeah,
well, I'm imagining it and it's not really that
yeah,
important, and
yeah.
actually it's not really affecting me at all, and I'm just making excuses. You go down that road if you don't get
Mm,
any kind of acknowledgement or
mm.
recognition that there
Yeah,
are symptoms.
so I used to work for a menstrual cycle tracking app called Fitter Woman,
Yeah,
and we one of the pieces of feedback that we'd often get from females was it was just so nice to know that what I was feeling wasn't made up. Like I
yeah,
would look at the app and be like, and it would be like, oh, you might be feeling a bit more tired, or you might need some more sleep. And they'd be like, oh my gosh, like
yeah,
okay, and it kind of validates how you're feeling, which is important. Like even if you can't do anything to solve it, even just acknowledging and knowing that there is a reason for why you're feeling like that, is a really big step.
yeah. It's huge, and I think that's just like one thing that everybody can do, and like tracking
Yeah,
your cycle is something that I've been doing for a while, and I'm always telling people to track your
yeah,
cycle because it's really interesting. And people are like, "Oh yeah, I
I
never
know.
thought about that."
It's amazing, is it? Like one of my old colleagues used to say, like, athletes prepare for everything, but they don't prepare for their period. Like,
Yeah,
it's amazing. Like, and I don't understand why. Well, there's lots of like societal issues and like,
yeah.
we have to cover it up and all of that, which is probably why. But yeah, like to know your own body, like start listening to it. Like, it's amazing how many people I now know who are like, "Oh, I know when I'm ovulating," because 'cause they're paying attention to the
Mm.
signs of their body, whereas lots of people who aren't tracking, like, wouldn't be able to know that.
Yeah, yeah. No, it's and as an athlete, you do want to be in touch with your body and be
Mm.
able to understand why it's doing what it's
Yeah.
doing. It can be a bit crazy sometimes.
Yeah, it can be, it can
What
be
is going
wild,
on?
but, that's the fun and games of being a female.
I know. Well, I quite liked, I use Fit a Woman app,
Mhm.
and I use it with my clients actually to
Nice.
track. So we do use it, and there's quite a few other tools that are out there now that's made it a lot easier for people to do that. When I was tracking my cycle and it was regular,
Mm.
it was nice because I knew where I was in my cycle and I
Mhm.
could pin it down. I was like, okay, I'm in my luteal. I'm meant to be feeling a bit tired and a bit
Mhm.
sort of, I don't know, I'm not so enthusiastic about training. I
Yeah.
might not be able to perform quite as well. And then my period would start, and I'd feel like better, this sort of relief.
Mhm.
At the moment, I'm like, I don't know, 60 days or something into a cycle, and I haven't had a period since 60 days ago, and
Yeah.
it's really bizarre because it's like
Yeah.
I got used to tracking and knowing where I was and feeling quite at home, and now I'm like, well, should I be feeling tired now?
Yeah.
I'm having to sort of go backwards now, and I'm having to question again that sort of, is it just me making it up, or is it
Yeah.
like,
Is it because I had a really busy week, or is it my hormones going wild? Yeah.
yeah, so it gets confusing again
Mhm.
later. So it's, if you can track, definitely do it because it's really helpful, and it
Mm.
and it does give you that reassurance. But because when you come out the other side, the side of like, or your periods are starting to change, it starts getting really confusing, and you're not really sure what's going on. And when, it's like almost, I just want to have a period now so that
Yeah,
I
I
know where I am
bet.
really, but it's kind of, I don't know whether it's going to happen.
Yeah, it's the roller coaster of, perimenopause.
Yeah, I know. Yeah. And then again, you're like, am I making it up?
Yeah.
Okay, so you talked a little bit about energy deficiency and how that can impact you
Yeah.
and stop you from having periods. So, what kind of things can people do to, keep an eye on that and make sure that
Mm.
they don't get into that situation?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, I mean, there's quite a few reasons why someone might not have a period. It's not always linked with just like the total amount of energy that they eat in a day. Um,
Okay.
so we also know that it can be to do with timing throughout a day. So if you're spending a long period of time fasted, um, then that's a negative sign to your body. It's basically your body saying, "Oh, I don't know when I'm next going to get food, and
Yeah.
therefore." I don't think it's the right time to have a baby right now. That's kind of like
Yeah.
really crude, but that's like the kind of what your body's doing. That's how it's evolved. Um, so yeah, it can be complete like caloric intake. It can be like throughout the day. It can be not having enough carbohydrate. So we know that underfueling, particularly with carbohydrate, can put your body on in this flight or fight mode, which shuts down your menstrual cycles. We also know though that like excessive amounts of psychological stress, um, and kind of sleep disturbances, so your circadian rhythm going all over the place. So, and that's often shift workers.
Yeah.
Both of those two things can also affect your cycle like this because they're also signals to your body that there's a threat out there. Because you have high levels of cortisol that can shut down your hormonal system. Um, so the things to look, and I guess also there are some people who might be fueling well, but they're really sensitive to the amount of training that they're doing. And if training completely ramps up, then that can also cause changes in your cycle. So something else to be aware of. Um, and then the signs to look for. So typically, a menstrual cycle is about 21 to 35 days in length. Kind of depends on which guidelines you're looking at, but they're the ranges that I go with. If your cycle starts to become longer than 35 days or longer than your normal, so say your normal cycle is 22 days in length, if your
Mm,
cycle starts to elongate, then that's a sign that your body probably hasn't ovulated or the ovulation's been delayed, and that's a sign that you're maybe deficient in energy, you're maybe not feeling quite right, maybe you're overtraining, maybe you're stressed, etc. All of those things that I just
mm,
talked about. So that's like the first red flag. Um, Sometimes you can not even realize that you're due on. Like I
mm,
know so many so many athletes that they're so busy, they're rushing around the place, and they don't realize that actually they've missed a cycle.
mm,
Anything longer than 90 days, that's like alarm bells for me, particularly. And we call that secondary amenorrhea.
mm,
And that's when your body is really unhappy, basically. Um,
mm,
and it's a good idea to just check that with a doctor, medical professional, because it might be that there's something underlying going on, like that's gynecological. But more often than not in our society, it's because it's something called secondary hypothalamic. Oh my gosh, I cannot say it. Hypothalamic amenorrhea. Um, which is to do with your hypothalamus in your brain basically detecting this threat of lack of energy, high stress,
mm,
training. So
yeah.
that would be the signs to look for, um, and then in terms of like what to do, it's kind of sit down and work out where you think you could do
Mm,
better. Um, have you been avoiding carbohydrates? It's
yeah.
really easy to because that's what the mass media wants to promote, um,
Mm,
as is doing fasted training, which again is not necessarily a good thing for females. But if
mm.
you're doing those, then maybe you need to stop doing those and see if your body responds better.
Yeah, and does it take quite a long time to recover from that, or can you
It
kind of
doesn't
do
have
it
to.
in one
Yeah.
cycle sort of thing?
Yeah, like, it kind of
Okay,
depends on how long you've not had a period for,
right. Yeah.
and how kind of all in you're going,
Mm,
because I think it's hard to change behavior. If something becomes a habit, we know that's really hard to change. So yeah, I think it depends on those 2 things.
yeah, I remember overhearing some female triathletes talking about this, like at one
Mm,
point, and they were like, "Oh yeah, I cut out fat." They'd cut out one of them had cut out fat from her diet
great.
completely, and she was like, "I haven't had a period for this long," and I was thinking,
Yeah,
well, yeah, there's a reason. And
yeah,
then someone else was saying, "Yeah, that happened to me when I did this," and she wanted to have a baby, so she was like, "I think I'm gonna have to start, eating
eating
properly
fat,
so that I
yeah.
can." I know, and it's like, why? I guess we were told, at one point, you read all sorts of
Mm,
rubbish sometimes, don't you?
mhm.
It's just like not really helpful at all, especially if you're an athlete. It's even worse.
It
It's like
is.
fat is bad or whatever, and it's like then
I
people
know.
have this fear of eating it, and
Or sugar is the devil. I think
yeah,
the
sugar now is the one, isn't it? That
the
we're
problem is, like, a lot of the research that these, headlines come from is done in sedentary men.
mm,
That's completely not therefore, they're not the messages to be applied to very active females, like, but the media blows it up and doesn't
yeah,
cite the study, or it's really hard also to have a critical appraisal of what you're consuming kind of subliminally on social
mm,
media or any other outlet. So, um, yeah, I think that would be my key message is, like, lots of research is not done on active females. So
yeah.
so yeah.
Yeah, definitely. We need to keep an eye on that. And sort of every time I read something now, I've got a whole load of questions,
Yeah,
or
that's
even
great.
just, anything that comes up in the news. I'm like, okay, but was it? And yeah, and I think we all need to be a lot more like that nowadays because there's just so much, and it's all quick, sort of like
Yeah,
sensationalist, do this, do that. And, it's very confusing now for people
it's really
and it's
confusing.
bad
Yeah.
enough, back when I was younger, but now it's just crazy, and you have
Mm.
to be able to filter, and and use some kind of critical thinking really
Mm,
as well in that situation.
yeah,
And you've got there. So with your ultra running, I'm
yeah.
assuming that's quite a challenge with consuming enough carbohydrates. How do you go about that?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely been a learning curve. I think it was funny, I was in my office, I did the Cardiff Half this year,
Yeah.
and one of my colleagues was also doing it, and he's a strength and conditioning coach, and he follows the rule book by to the T, and he was
Yeah.
telling me about how many carbs he was trying to consume, like, 3 days before, and he was, like, measuring it out. He was like, "Yeah, I need to get, like, another 200. I need, like, 700 altogether," and then he was like, "Oh, so what do you do before your races?" And I was like, "Ooh, I just eat a bit more carb." Like, I'm not that person that's gonna do that to my food or, like, really think about the numbers, but, um, I think some of the key things I've n I mean, when I was probably about 20 to 24 before I got into this job, I did fasted training, 100% I did.
Mm,
It's easier, I don't wanna eat in the morning, or, like, I can get up, do some exercise, and then I'll have breakfast. But since, like, learning more about the female body and understanding that, that's, like, definitely a no-go.
mm,
Uh, so that for ultra running, really important, particularly if you're going out for, like, 10 miles of a training
mm,
run. And then I think, like, liquids have been really useful because sometimes you don't get those hunger cues, particularly
mm,
when you're running 2 hours, like, you don't always feel hungry, you might feel a bit sick
mm.
sometimes, or, like, your just hunger cues are messed up. Um,
Yeah.
so and triathletes, definitely I experience that because they do so many hours of training. Um,
Mm,
so having, like, liquid is much easier, like a smoothie with some kind of source of protein in it, great protein and carb. And so I've definitely found that easier. And then also just like eating sweets or like things that I
mm,
really enjoy. That's a really good way to get carbs in.
yeah.
And it doesn't fill you up, like having a handful of Haribo isn't going to make you feel full, but actually that's increasing your carbohydrate.
Yeah, definitely. So fasted training for females,
Hmm.
why is that such a no-no? That's
Yeah.
like the research is there for that, isn't it? Because it's not
Yeah.
there for everything. It's kind of like some, but I'm going off now.
No.
Go on.
So for females particularly, so you have to think males have a different sensitivity to things like this. But for females, basically, when you are awake in the morning, early morning, your cortisol levels are quite high.
Mm,
They drop throughout the day, but they're quite high in the morning. They peak then. And if you're doing fasted training, that is another cortisol spike on top of that. So
yeah.
they're already quite high, and then you don't have any food and you go out to exercise. And that is another threat to your body because it's like, oh,
Mm,
it's a stress, I guess. Your body's working hard. So your cortisol levels increase as a result of that. And that can almost, like, females almost have a threshold. And if females' cortisol is too high consistently, then that can send messages to your hypothalamus and your brain to say, I'm going to,
mm,
like, I think things need to stop in terms of hormones because we need to save energy. Not sure what's coming here, but it's a stressful situation, and let's save energy by shutting down the menstrual cycle. So
yeah.
essentially, that's why it's not a good idea.
Okay. And when we're older as well, like cortisol causes that inflammation that women
Yeah,
get when they're older. So again, I tell older female athletes don't
don't
do
fast.
fasted
Yeah,
training because it's another, like you say, cortisol spike. And we've already got elevated cortisol
yeah,
in that situation anyway. So it kind of makes it worse.
I know. But it is hard. Like, sometimes you have to get up early and
Mm.
fit it in at times you wouldn't necessarily choose to if you're going to train. Um, but you just have something. It doesn't
It
have to be
doesn't
a
have to be
full
loads,
blown
doesn't it?
meal.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm like, have half a banana at
yeah,
least,
or a
that's
gel,
not,
like something that's easy
yeah,
to get in. Yeah,
yeah, it doesn't, I think sometimes people think they have to wait, get up 2 hours before and
Yeah,
have
no,
a full breakfast. It's like, no, just eat something just to get your sugar levels up.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the menstrual cycle, are there any like patterns to, I know everybody's different and everyone's going
Yeah,
to experience things differently, but can you just outline what generally happens to women throughout their cycle
that
and
cycle.
how it affects their training?
Yeah, for sure. Yes, I guess that is the biggest caveat is that like everyone is individual and every individual will also have cycles that are different.
Yeah.
There's so much, so there's inter and intra variation. Um, but so the cycle starts with day one of bleeding. So day one of your period is first day of the cycle, and then that can last anywhere between 3 to 8 days. Um, and for some people that's really heavy, some people it's light. And we know that if you're heavier, then you're more prone to being dehydrated and fatigued, um, and having kind of anemia or iron loss an
Mm.
iron deficiency. So a little like kind of note there just to check how heavy you are. And then some people on day one feel great. It can be like the best day in the world because it's like, oh, your period's finally come. Or some
Yeah.
people might not feel great. It's probably the phase I think is the most varied in terms of how people
Yeah.
feel. Um, and actually, someone I was speaking to the other day was saying how hers has changed as she's gotten older. So it used to be day one was when she felt great, but actually now it's kind of day two, day three.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, that's why it's really important to track so that you're aware of that or you're prepared.
Mm.
Um, it is when your hormones are really low.
Mm.
So they're kind of at their lowest point in this time of the cycle. Um, and you might feel tired, but again, as I said, you might have more energy.
Yeah.
Um, then after kind of bleeding stops, that's when estrogen levels start to pick up. So um, it's kind of what's known as the follicular phase, um,
Yeah.
and progesterone stays low, but estrogen elevates. Estrogen is associated with kind of increase in serotonin and dopamine release. So usually people feel pretty good in this phase. Um, it might be something that like is completely just a week or so where you don't have to think about it. And actually, yeah, some of the triathletes I was speaking to recently, they were like, "Yeah, we get one day in a month where we feel good." And
Oh,
that would be that week.
yeah.
It's sad that they don't feel good the other time, but
Yeah.
um, um, some people can feel like appetite loss or something because estrogen is linked with kind of stabilizing of your blood sugar levels. But
Mm.
obviously, it's really important to still kind of fuel correctly. And actually, we know that in this phase, if you make any kind of underfueling instances or situations where you're underfueled, then that can have a knock on effect on ovulation because that's what's coming next. So,
Yeah.
something to be aware of, particularly. Um, then so the follicular phase ends with ovulation, which is one day when an egg is released um, from the ovaries, and some people actually have ovulation pain around this time. If you do, it's nothing to be alarmed about, but something like anti-inflammatory can probably help most of
Mm.
the time because usually pain around the menstrual cycle is linked with an increase in inflammatory markers.
Yeah.
Um, then after ovulation, you enter the luteal phase, which is when progesterone increases. Um, and I did my master's dissertation around how this phase can have an effect on your body temperature and potentially have an effect on like your running economy. Because it increases like breathing rate and heart rate. So progesterone is known as a thermogenic hormone. So it increases your core body temperature by about half a degree.
Mm.
Um, if you're tracking on or you use something like natural cycles, which is the like thermometer kind of contraceptive. I wouldn't
Mm.
necessarily recommend it as a contraceptive. That's not my area, my wheelhouse, but it
Yeah.
is really interesting to look because you measure your temperature every morning.
Yeah.
But also, if you have an Aura ring or a Wheat Band, they also measure your temperature, and you should be able to see an increase in your body temperature at this time,
Okay.
which is I mean, obviously, I'm a science geek. I like
Yeah,
graphs.
that sounds
It's
really
super
interesting. I like them as well. What's
yeah.
happening?
I know.
Yeah.
Um, and then I guess around this time, sometimes sleep disturbances can occur because of that increase in body temperature.
Yeah.
Um, Training can be affected. It kind of depends on who you are. Um, but one thing that is really interesting is that progesterone is linked with protein muscle catabolism, so the breakdown of
Okay.
protein and protein in your muscles. And so I encourage, particularly before like gym sessions, I would encourage people to have protein before as well as after, because you're
Mm.
elevating the amount of protein that's in your body so that there's like less opportunity for it to break down, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that does make sense.
Yeah.
And would that be similar, like if you are in sort of perimenopause, you've got more progesterone probably in your
Yeah.
body and less
Yeah.
estrogen,
100%.
and
Yeah.
that'll be so then you'd recommend more protein before and after in that situation as
Yeah.
well.
Well, it's just making sure you do actually have protein
Yeah,
before,
because a
because
lot of women don't have enough protein.
no, and
Hard.
breakfast, typically, unless you're having like eggs, is really hard.
Yeah.
Like eggs and yogurt are kind of the main
It's
sources of
really
protein
nice,
for
isn't it?
breakfast.
You
Great,
could have
but
that together as well, can't you?
yeah, yeah. So I think like, your bog standard cereal or toast isn't gonna cut it in terms
No.
of your protein requirements. So, it's just making a conscious effort to have something beforehand, and knowing what works for you as well, because for some people, if they're gonna go for a run, they don't necessarily want to have dairy beforehand because that can make them
Yeah.
feel sick. I'm not one of those people, but some people are. So it's just like knowing, yeah, working out what's right for your body.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, that's good.
Um, so then that's kind of like the like 3/4 through your cycle.
Yeah.
And then the last phase is like the late luteal phase or premenstrual phase. So that's typically when symptoms occur. It's when hormone levels decrease. So in the mid luteal phase, your progesterone and estrogen levels are high, and then after that they fall quite rapidly, and that's quite a significant thing for your body to deal with. And as a result, there's this increase in inflammatory markers, and that can cause what we think that's one of the causes of menstrual cycle symptoms.
Mm.
Um, the withdrawal of hormone and the increase in inflammation. So you might notice that you feel more tired, you feel less motivated, you might feel more uncoordinated, have like loss of balance, brain fog. Like there's over 150 potential symptoms, which is
Yeah.
like mind blowing. Um, but and like your bowels might change because hormones. We know there are hormone receptors on your kind of gut in your gut, and your gut microbiome is sensitive to them. So there's loads of potential effects these hormones can have, particularly around that time. But in terms of like what you can do about it, and I think that's what our like attitude, particularly at Sport Wales, is like, okay, so this is potentially a problem, but let's give you some solutions. Um,
Yeah.
is focusing on sleep, making sure you're getting 8 hours. You might be tempted to have a early morning or only cut it to 6 hours, but honestly, like getting more sleep is important. Fuel
Okay.
yourself frequently throughout the day and make sure you get a good amount of fruits and vegetables in. Um, Getting some sources of antioxidants is really important. And also
Mm.
try throughout the whole cycle, but try to get some kind of omega 3s in as well. We know that can help with
Okay.
inflammation. Um, and then if you're training, like listen to what your body wants if you can. Some people can't. Some people have set training and there's no wiggle room, and that's
Mm.
fine. So think about that. What else is around that training to support you? How do you recover well? How do you sleep well? How do you feel well? If you can change training and you're feeling rubbish, don't try and push through it. Like talk to your coach or talk to yourself if you set your own training and see if
Mm.
there's things you can still use to progress you. So, for example, um, if you're a runner, you might want to focus more on doing some drills or
Yeah.
like something that is kind of technical rather than like, I'm just going to beast myself and do really high intensity, or do like a
Yeah.
threshold run where you're still working hard, but you're not pushing yourself unimaginably. Um,
Mm.
so there's often tweaks you can make to change to training, and one change session is not going to be
No.
the end of your career. You know,
Yeah.
um, it's hard. It's really
A
hard
lot
to
of
see, but
people
it
find
is
that hard to
true.
get their head around, don't they? It's
I
like,
know, it's a big
"Oh,
lesson.
I missed one session." It's
Yeah.
like, really doesn't matter
No,
on the
no, it
grand
really
scheme of
doesn't
things.
matter. Um,
Yeah.
and there'd be like, and then also make sure you're de-stressing as well, because we know stress can just exacerbate these symptoms. Um,
Mm.
and that's kind of the end of the cycle, and then it starts all over again, and you get another
Yeah.
21 to 35 days of
Of
delightful changes.
interesting, yeah.
Yeah,
But I think it's good because, like you say, we can, when we've got the knowledge about it, it's like, this isn't a bad thing. There's, like when you're in that sort of high phase, you feel great,
yeah,
sometimes. And I get sort of like I think that's, I guess when you're in perimenopause, your hormones are doing all
yeah.
sorts of weird things. And
They are.
sometimes I think I'll get a peak of estrogen and I'll be like, woohoo, I feel amazing.
Nice.
And then it'll be like an hour of that. And then I'll be, oh, what was all that about? What was I so excited about? So it's very strange, but yeah, I can almost feel, and I think if I hadn't tracked before,
Yeah,
I wouldn't know that that was what
but
that
that was hormone.
feeling
Yeah.
was. Yeah, I would just be
Mhm.
like, what's wrong with me? Why am I
Yeah,
having these mood swings? It's like, no, it's just your hormones are doing their thing, and that's okay.
yeah,
They've got to do their thing.
it's good.
So with you talked a little bit about research earlier and the research that's done, mainly, well, within the health industry anyway, we have like
Mhm.
male,
Male.
sedentary males,
Yeah,
and sometimes it's sedentary females as well, or people with diabetes.
yeah,
Quite
things
often that's where they get
yeah.
data from, isn't it? But within sport, is there anything, where's the gap there? Where do you think
Mm.
the major gaps there are with
Yeah,
research?
good question. And over the last, like, since I've started working in this area particularly, it has increased like exponentially, I'd say. I
Yeah.
remember when I started as a master's student, there was just like, papers maybe from the early 2000s, before then like the 70s, and that was about it. Like there wasn't, I don't remember there being that much, whereas it has come on a lot. Um, Now we're still trying to understand kind of the symptom etiology, like exactly what causes menstrual cycle symptoms. But from an applied point of view, there's a lot of research now that shows how the cycle can have a negative effect on and athletes, whether that's people at the elite of their game, or amateurs who just kind of, well, I said just train 3 times a week.
Yeah, it's
Who
quite a
train 3 times
lot.
a week? That's still a lot.
Yeah.
Um, um, and I think that's so super important, because I think before then people would be like, "Oh well, come on, you're just as you say, you're just making it up. Like it
Mm,
doesn't really. Why should we dedicate extra resource into supporting females around this?" Um, but I think like the next step is like really finding out what works for symptoms, and like,
mm,
we need some really good randomized control studies around different symptom interventions, because I mean, particularly like myself, I can speak anecdotally, is like if I'm working with an individual who really has a hard time around a certain time phase in their cycle, I'm like, okay, let's just do this, this, and this. Like, let's just try everything, because hopefully something
mm,
will work. But we don't know what is actually working in that situation. We don't know why.
yeah.
So that's really what's needed, I think, to kind of, yeah, to continue to push the understanding of the female menstrual cycle.
Mm. And how difficult is it to do those studies? Because
So hard.
I think it must be pretty tricky.
Yeah.
I took part in one a little while ago. It was a climbing one. I think she's based in South Wales as well. I don't know. And she was doing some research on climbing and the menstrual cycle. And
Mhm.
I was filling the forms in and things. And I was like, there's so much else that's affecting me as
Mm.
well as that. It's really hard to differentiate between what
Mhm.
is menstrual cycle related and what is sleep or
Yeah.
like life stress related.
Yeah.
So I could imagine that kind of like clouds the
Oh, yeah.
research as well. I mean, it would with anyone, but then you've also got like more multiple factors, haven't you?
Yeah, it's really hard to know, like, what's hormone driven, what's the effect of your life cycle, like, of your lifestyle on your hormones, for example. Like,
Mm,
we don't know how the 2 kind of interact between each other really.
yeah,
Um, Again, we only really have anecdotal evidence or kind of, um I can't think of the word, like where you look back on data sets, for example, and you
okay.
can kind of like, oh well, the Mediterranean diet is associated with better symptoms. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
that's not that helpful. Um, so yeah, it's really hard, and I guess it's also really hard to do research with athletes, and because particularly athletes, we can't change anything that means that they feel worse,
Yeah.
or you can't do a randomized control trial because then you have to have a control group,
Mm,
and then so yeah, it's really difficult to do research. Like you can do it, it is possible, but you have to have kind of a pure determination to do it effectively. Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, I can imagine. But it's sort of getting there and there's
it
things
is. Yeah,
happening. And I think
is
also, we can't discount like personal and practical experience and trying things out with athletes and seeing what works and us kind of
yeah,
going, actually, I'm going to try this out as an
yeah,
athlete and see what works and
100%. I
just
think
don't be afraid of experimenting a little bit with
no,
things.
and, like, a few years ago, I found it quite frustrating because there was a lot of talk about, like, how, you know, you can't you can't change training. I don't believe you should, but you can't do things or intervene because there isn't enough research,
Oh yeah.
and as a practitioner, like, that goes against my, like, ethics to not help somebody if an athlete's coming to me because they're suffering. I can't sit back and say, "Oh, sorry, the
There's
research
no
isn't
reason.
there."
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah, you've gotta try something. So,
Yeah.
yeah, it does count for a lot, really.
Yeah, definitely. I remember that because they did a meta-analysis, didn't they, of
Yeah.
all the research, and it was like, well, there's not enough evidence to change trait. And I was like, yeah, but surely, like, think talking back, looking back at the beginning when we talked about just even acknowledging it, it's
Mm.
kind of like saying it's going back a step and going, well, no, the science isn't there, so it doesn't
So it doesn't
mean
matter.
anything
Yeah.
or it's not important. And so
Yeah.
I found that frustrating as well. I was like, no,
Yeah. I
we've
know.
got to talk about it. But yeah,
Exactly.
science is not always the be all and end all, really.
No, and
It's
it
a
goes
part of everything, isn't it?
exactly. It goes back to, like, how it's interpreted as well, and,
Yeah,
so yeah.
yeah, definitely. So yeah, if you could share like a key message to anyone that's working with athletes
Yeah.
or any athletes out there that, what would that be? What would you like to say to people about being a woman in sport and being an athlete? There's
Um,
probably quite a lot of things you'd like to say, but
yeah, I was trying to think of okay, so I guess try to be positive around it. Probably is well, not probably, is a really important thing. Um, like, embrace being a female or embrace coaching a female, like, be positive around females. Don't there's so much negative talk around it. Let's
mm,
change that. Um, Secondly, like, if you're coaching a female, ask them about their menstrual cycle. If you're a female athlete being coached, talk to your coach about your menstrual cycle. Um, Tell them that you're on contraception or ask them if they're on, because that can affect hormones. And know whether you're having a regular cycle. The only way you're going to know that is by tracking it. So track how long your cycle is. Even if that's all you do, that's great. But I would
mm,
also encourage you to track symptoms to start to know if you do have symptoms and how that has an effect on you. Um, and then talk about it. I think like they're the two things, like be positive and like let's understand more. Um,
yeah,
Two key messages.
yeah, I like that, and that goes for as you get older as well. Because I was talking to a friend the other day and we were talking about hot flushes and things
Yeah.
like that. And it was
It's
like,
great.
oh, everyone's so, I don't want to complain about it. It's a thing, but it's like, we don't have to see it as negative. And I think there's been a huge amount of people talking about menopause now. And
Yeah.
it's going in that direction of like, this is a bad thing. And I just
Mm,
don't like to see it that way because it's not. It's you transitioning to a new stage of life. And if we
yeah.
can like reframe it and you think about it in a more positive way, I'm much wiser now.
Yeah.
We need to kind of almost go back to the wise woman and get in
Yeah.
touch with that side of us
Yeah.
more to feel positive about it, because otherwise it's just like people complaining and comparing all their symptoms and
Mm,
not being happy in the fact that they're like an older woman, and isn't
mm,
that cool, and you can
mm,
still be really inspiring and
mm,
show people sort of amazing things. So yeah, we do
mm.
need that positivity and the being proud of being female rather than going, oh,
Exactly.
it's so hard. And yeah,
Yeah,
we're
I know,
not victims. We're like, we've got to you know be proactive in that as
I
well, don't
know.
we? Yeah.
That is what I say to the females I work with going through puberty as well. Like, it might be hard, it might suck sometimes being female,
Mm.
but it's also amazing. So like, let's think about it like that.
Yeah, it is amazing. There's a lot of amazing experiences that we
Yeah,
get to have. So
exactly.
yeah, we've got to keep it on that note. Awesome. Okay. And so where can people find you and find out more about you or follow you?
Yeah, I mean, I do have social media. There's not loads of content that's like physiology related on
That's
there,
right. They might want to follow you running or something
but
like that.
I'm Esther Goldsmith on Instagram,
Okay.
or I'm E Goldsmith Phys PHYS on X, Twitter.
Okay, doke.
Um, yeah, so
Yeah,
that's
I'll put some like links if people want to follow, and if there's anything else that you want to plug or tell people about, then you can
amazing.
let me know, and I'll put that in the notes as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Celia.
Okay, no worries. Cheers, Esther.
Thank
That's great. Thanks for listening today. Have a great day. Take care. Bye for now.